I really have to thank, in some sense, the tragedies in my life to get me to Bitcoin, because that's when I really started questioning the system. Because until then, I was very, very gullible, because I thought the government wouldn't really do these things. 1984 was a book I read back in college, and I thought it's a nice fiction, but it really didn't look like fiction in 2020. I felt really bad. I had to take 3 COVID shots before I could get to my flight to go see my grieving mother, almost after a year to the date when my father passed away. So it was quite dystopian, and I saw Bitcoin as the only escape route that would kind of put a leash on such governance, which kind of leans towards dictatorship.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Jeeves to the podcast. Jeeves is a Bitcoin advocate who believes Bitcoin is a network of connected consciousness, student of Zen, and explorer of mindspace. Welcome to the Bitcoin Edge, Jeeves.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting with you and hearing a little bit of a different perspective. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your Bitcoin journey.
Sure. I'm a curious monkey. That's how I would like to start off by describing myself. I do a lot of questioning. I seem to thrive in dwelling in questions, and so curiosity has gotten the better of me at some point. And I have transitioned from being an absolute non-believer, a rebel, to someone who has tried to question why I wouldn't believe or why I would rebel, to be the Jeeves I am today. So it's been very interesting journey over the past close to 4 decades, and I keep learning every day, and that's one of the reasons why I have my handle as Jeeves the Curious, because I keep monkeying around with my thoughts and trying to see how I can just beat myself to it.
And when you say non-believer, what do you mean by that?
In the sense, I grew in a very conservative Hindu family, so most of the rituals in Hinduism are symbolic in nature. And in school, we are taught about believing things that are more physical in nature, not metaphysical or even philosophical. And symbols are meant to be specific definitions that are written in books. So the indoctrination in schools actually kind of enforce a kind of thinking that is against critical thinking or even lateral thinking. And what happens is, then you follow the crowd. You don't really try to question authority. It's very typical of modern schooling system, where you're actually being enforcing children to kind of behave in a way that would be convenient for societies to, let's say, function in a way that would make them more manageable, I guess. But the downside of it is we end up becoming non-believers to certain aspects of life that actually makes it even more curious than we would want to believe. Since I grew up in that environment, I found it quite ridiculous because it was quite juxtaposed with my education. It wasn't really matching with anything that I have learned. So it was more like I had to unlearn myself over the years to to kind of rediscover what it means to be me and what is I, and if it really has any meaning, if at all, and why do we do what we do, and how do we have such complexities even though everybody's trying to make things simpler. And that's how I ended up asking questions. And so I discovered, I kind of bumped into first principles thinking by accident, because I simply started asking why, but not only why, but at some point it's not going to make sense to keep asking why, but how, like how does it happen. Few things are phenomena that keeps happening, and they are governed by these underlying principles that are rather more connected to how it works rather than why it works. So that's how I kept going, and kind of involving myself into a point where I was quite shocked that there are a few aspects about my own culture that I didn't know, which had scientific bearings, and and that's predating even the most sophisticated instruments we had. back even in 1800s, when we discovered that, okay, we were, the Earth is not the center of the solar system or the universe. And, it's the heliocentric solar system became a big taboo because it started breaking the norm. Certain things in my culture actually, when I go back to ancient texts, it actually talks about these things pretty freely, and it wasn't radical at that point. And it's like 3,000 years old text and 5,000 year old text, uh, and I get really fascinated. Like, how did they even start thinking about it? So they pretty much probably had first principles thinking again to arrive at their conclusions. And so I kind of rediscovered not only my culture, but I ended up expanding myself into Zen philosophy. And Alan Watts was a huge influence in my thinking, in shaping my thoughts into trying to understand the human condition and trying to see how the world works the way it does, and why do we do certain things in particular ways, and why do we take life so seriously when it's meant to be fun.
What a great point. Well, on that note, how did you discover Bitcoin through all of this discovery?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually heard about it. There's some whisperings about it in 2015, and I didn't pay much attention because I was very busy trying to prove myself to be a good engineer. So most of my work, even though I was in tech, and uh, I was into electrical design, and similar to the background that Jason had. So your previous episode was a Jason, and he's a systems guy. I'm a systems guy as well. So I do simplify things, and the simplification is my theme. I end up taking up complex problems and then breaking it down to simpler terms so that I can then pass it on to the technical teams to make it work like an entire fully functional system. So that's my actual professional job. But my background is in electrical engineering. So I do design, but I also understand how do I arrive to the end product by tracing it back to simplifying simplification by systems thinking. So it's a habit. And I started looking into the problems of the money system back when I was a child, because I know how my father used to struggle with simply with the way things used to be expensive. And all I heard as a kid was everything is getting expensive. But I wouldn't know why it is getting expensive. Nobody has an answer for why it would. It's funny enough that one of my distant relatives was economist back in pre-independent India, which was still in under the British rule. And finally, when we achieved independence, and our first prime minister had to write a book. It's called Discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru, and the preface was written by my great 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 uncle. So he actually said to my mom, and my mom recalls this after many decades. She spoke to me about him, and she said he understood what happened in 1971 was a big disaster, and he said things would have been a lot simpler if it wouldn't have happened. But when he understood getting off the gold standard was real, he said it would take you a truckload of money going forward to get a handful of rice. And my mom really didn't understand back then, but today it stands to be true. I'm kind of shocked that probably 50 years ago, 100 Indian rupees was enough to run a family of six. A single paycheck of 100 rupees, Indian currency, was enough to sustain a family of six. Now it's not. I don't get a decent cup of coffee for 100 bucks in India, and it's ridiculous how things have gotten expensive. And that's all I heard all the time, but I never got an answer as to why. Because a lot of us are so mentally occupied by trying to chase every single penny that we can, that we forget to stop and think. And my aha moment was actually when COVID happened, and I finally got my time to start thinking about stuff. And on a side note, I actually had saved up a couple of $1,000 for as my savings, because savings is a big deal in India as well. So I was saving here, and then I thought, okay, I might as well open up a Robinhood account and just invest my money. I don't know where I'm going to invest, but I'm just going to do my own research and try to invest. And it was 2019 December when I opened it. And by March, it was half of what it was because of the COVID crash. And I panicked so much because I thought I lost money already. It was unrealized loss. But somehow I was patient enough to wait to recover my investments. And then I pulled my money out and I said, no, this is not the way to do it. I have to understand what is money, how stock market works. And that's what really led me to Bitcoin, because I took an entire year almost to study about money, to study about what stocks are, what equities are. And in the process, I bumped into Bitcoin. I was not sure if I should go down that route. There were too many negative articles that I was reading. I was not very risk friendly. I used to be very careful about risking my savings. 2021, my father passed away because of COVID, and that kind of hit me hard, because then uh, I, I I felt I was more responsible for my mother, who was the only surviving parent, and so I should start really thinking about how I can be there for her. And lucky enough that she was very, my father left her in a good financial state, so she didn't have to really depend on me. But nevertheless, I needed to know how I can help her and help myself as well. I shouldn't have to compromise on my time for the money I have to earn to sustain my family tree. So that really led me to Bitcoin, and I started reading and I read the white paper. Still, it was very simple for me because I thought there is no way that a simple white paper can actually solve the money problem. And since inflation was a given, this was actually explaining to me that inflation won't be a thing if we move to the Bitcoin standard, at least in terms of satoshis or Bitcoin, because one Bitcoin is going to be one Bitcoin at all points. So I really was surprised when I started reading into a lot of pro Bitcoin articles and watching podcasts talking about Bitcoin. And then it changed my perspective. Until then, I was a non believer. And I'm just a cycle old. I've able to stomach the volatility for four years. I've been extremely satisfied with my behavior, at least in terms of price swings up or down. And I was able to, in the meantime, also understand in terms of time preference how I can wait for my reward rather than try to do something for quick profits. And it's all those profits are really just fiat. It really doesn't make sense anymore to think in terms of dollars or Indian rupees, because we never know what's going to come next, like what other new mandates we're going to get from the government. So I really have to thank, in some sense, the tragedies in my life to get me to Bitcoin, because that's when I really started questioning the system. Because until then, let's say, I was very gullible, because I thought the government wouldn't really do these things. 1984 was a book I read back in college, and I thought it's a nice fiction, but it really didn't look like fiction in 2020 and onwards. I felt really bad, to the point that I had to take all the jabs. I had to take 3 COVID shots before I could get to my flight to go see my grieving mother. Almost after a year to the date when my father passed away. So my mom was all by herself, and the government wouldn't let me hop into the plane without my COVID passport. So it was quite dystopian. Uh, and I saw Bitcoin as the only escape route that would kind of put a leash on such governance, which kind of leans towards dictatorship. So that's where really that's how I really got into Bitcoin. And then I'm now completely a maxi, because all my savings are now gone into Bitcoin. The only thing left is my 401k, which is unfortunately stuck for the time being in the stock market. But otherwise, I don't think I'm going to ever think about investing in anything else. It doesn't make any sense at all going forward.
Well, you sound like a true Bitcoiner. And I'm sorry about your dad. That's very difficult. And I so relate to you. I too had to get 2 COVID shots to go to Zimbabwe. Otherwise, I wasn't able to visit my family. So
Oh, wow.
I did the same. And I think a lot of people discovered Bitcoin during COVID. So you're right. That
Hmm.
was a blessing in the way that we had time to think and learn. And I just love your story because you knew that there was a problem with the money system way back, and your mom had an idea when, well, your family in 1971. I had no idea back then, but you're right. When we went off the gold standard, that affected everybody, and it gave governments around the world license to print. And
Right.
and you have mentioned that the corruption of money corrupts societies. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a simple example to how I think humans are gullible to the point that they will break rules if they think that it's no longer convenient to follow principles. And the incentive is if I try to be very clean about everything, I'm never going to survive in the fiat world. And my father had similar issues with some officials in the Indian government. So he was working in the natural gas sector, which was mostly government regulated, and it was hard to stay clean. He was one of the few people in the industry who was doing business, but not at the point of exploiting. And a lot of others who were his counterparts, were his peers rather, were not very happy about it because it felt like he was just giving them the finger. But he was just a simple man. He just wanted to follow his principles. That's how he grew up. But in that environment, he pretty much grew up in poverty. He lost his dad when he was like 7 years old, and it was really hard for them to. And he had like 5 sisters. He was the last kid uh, in among his siblings. He was the youngest, and he had 2 other brothers. It was quite hard for them to grow up in that environment, and they learned a lot of hard lessons. But they also did understand that it's very easy to go the wrong route for money, but it doesn't make sense when it comes to just the family values. It would put them at risk of losing their value system. And so that's what I saw in him when he was doing business. It would be the same thing. And a lot of them would not be happy with the way he was dealing with his customers, let's say. There was once a time when he was almost terminated for all the wrong reasons, although he was a little trusty with one of his employees, and she took advantage and did illegal activities with the natural gas supply, and he was in trouble. And a lot of his colleagues said, just set fire to. Back then, it wasn't even like we didn't have computers. It was just all paper documents. And they said, why don't you make a fire accident at your office and burn every document, and then the evidence is lost. So nobody can hold it against you, and you'll go scot free. But he said he wouldn't do it, and he went straight to the officers. He said there were some discrepancies that happened, and then he was put in arbitration for being away when these things happen. And it was hard. It was hard to watch him endure all of that with him being the only bread earner. He had my grandma to look after, wife and 2 kids, and still he went to safeguard his value system. So principles and values are big in my family, and we stick to it. Even when we have opposing views, we still stick to our values and we stick to our principles, and it has worked well so far. And I continue the tradition, even though he never passed on the tradition to me verbally. I saw him doing it, like being him as a kid. So it had a very huge impact on my own value system, the way I formulated my value system, and saw how it's easy to fall prey to corruption. And it's because everybody's trying to chase and beat inflation. So this is what I see in terms of human beings being corrupt, or societies being corrupt, or governments being corrupt. They know that money is corrupt in itself. So if the money is corrupt, then it becomes easier to kind of find an excuse to say, oh, if I toe the line a little bit, it's not going to hurt anybody. It's like I'm just saying a white lie, but it's not like I'm killing anybody, so I can justify anything, right? I can justify just draining someone else's savings and saying he's still alive, so I didn't really do anything wrong. So this is how we kind of allow ourselves to shape our reality to the point that we become almost inhuman. Alan Watts puts it perfectly well when he says, when you really want to hate someone, you you kind of label them to the point that they are not no longer human anymore. If you dehumanize something and then you subject atrocities on that person, then it's justifiable. But is it really true? It's like that's not your original nature. You're doing it because you're getting incentivized in a corrupt system, and you're justifying it in a way that would make it sound very righteous, but it's not.
So what you're saying is everything is downstream of money. When we have a corrupt money, and you might not be saying everything, but that's something
Right.
said by
Most things, most of our decisions ends up being competitive, even in the wrong sense. Like wins $1 million, the neighbors will be jealous, or you will suddenly find yourself talking to distant relatives you didn't even know existed, and it's all because everybody's coming from a scarcity mindset problem. It's more like, and here's the paradox for scarcity mindset, right? Bitcoin is scarce, but when you adopt Bitcoin, you have an abundant mindset. You don't mind someone else stacking sats. In fact, most, if not all, Bitcoiners, like true Bitcoiners, want everybody to stack because everybody wins in this game, like how Michael Saylor puts it, right? Dave Portnoy never gets it. I don't know why. But in a fiat system, the money is unlimited because you can print it. It's toilet paper. But people have a scarcity mindset. And it's simply because the way it holds value. The unit of account is so disgusting in fiat system. You never can say $1 is $1. Depends on what time did you have that $1, right? It's really sad to see. And that's why we keep moving the goalpost when it comes to our own principles and values. We'll say, okay, yeah, a little more corruption is okay because I have to feed my wife and kids, and so I can come up with 100 reasons why I want to be corrupt, and it's simply because of the money. The incentive is, if you aren't corrupt, you won't make it, and so just normalize corruption, and then you normalize surviving, and survival of the fittest becomes survival of the most corrupt, and that's the whole theme around the fiat system.
Yeah, very well said. And do you think some of, you said that Bitcoiners, we like each other to stack, and that is so true. But we also do need people to get it so that adoption continues to grow. So there is a little bit of ego in there, but at the same time, we know that it makes our lives better and we want other people's lives to be better too.
Right. And also we would like to see individuals winning in this scenario rather than the big institutions and the governments. Yes, they play a big role. I agree, but they have a responsibility to kind of lay the foundation of legitimizing it and kind of adopting it into their structure. But a lot of people believe that it has to be first the institutions, the governments, the nation states, and then the individual. I think Bitcoin kind of turns it around and says, no, I'll have a level playing field and everybody wins. So everybody gets to stack based on what their current status is. But no matter one of the very interesting member in Smash by Saturday is a person whose handle is PRS. He is in Smash by, and he buys $1.60 every day or something like that. He kind of smash buys $1.60 because that's all he can afford to do. And he's still a student, and he's in college. And I keep telling him it doesn't matter how much you're stacking right now, because over time that habit is going to compound. And we are taught math in school, but we never understand what's the real meaning of compound interest. And and I think Bitcoin is going to you know blow everyone's minds when we start applying the idea of compound interest to what's happening with our value as well. It's almost like it's not just a store of value, but it's also like a store of time, because you're saving yourself from slogging at work for, I don't know, sometime in the future. You may not have to worry about saving or trying to chase more fiat, because you have already done your due diligence and you have moved your energy, your proof of work into the Bitcoin standard. So it holds value in terms of time and energy. So you save yourself from working beyond retirement, which is probably going to be a reality, or is already a reality right now, where a lot of people are still working even though they are closer to retirement, simply because they don't have anything saved up.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Well, shout out to PRS, who is stacking as a college student. Instead of spending money on beer or Coca-Cola, he's putting a little bit into Bitcoin. And this is something that Bitcoin does teach us, to have this low time preference. And yeah, I wish I had started when I was in college.
I know. And funny story, I just had a discussion with my buddy from high school. And in 2009 or 2010, he was in the UK for work, and his colleague there did talk about Bitcoin back then to him, and he said, "Throw a few pennies at it. You're getting like 500 Bitcoins for a few pennies. It will be big in a couple of years." And my friend didn't really take the bait. He just thought it was just another kind of a weird scam, and he has totally forgotten about it. And I just somehow ended up talking about inflation, and he talked about Bitcoin or crypto. And then I pulled him to talk about Bitcoin, and he said, "Oh yeah, my friend actually told me about it, and but I didn't think too much about 500 Bitcoins." And I asked him, "Do you know how much a Bitcoin is worth today?" He said, "No, I don't really follow crypto, Bitcoin." And I had to tell him how much 500 Bitcoin is worth today, and he was left speechless, because he said, I wouldn't have to keep working if that was the case, because my entire bloodline would have been free of chasing every single paycheck that they can get. It's ridiculous. And I said, "Yeah, you lost." And then I asked him, who is this legend who really talked about Bitcoin back when it was just like obscure fantasy coin on the internet. And he said, "Yeah, there's this guy." And I said, "Is he still around? Are you in touch with him? I want to know what he's doing. Like, I want to know if he's still around, and if you can talk to him." And he tried to search for him. He took a day to try to see if he can get in touch with him, and he's completely off radar, and he's gone. Like, there's no trace of him even in any social media, like no LinkedIn, no X, absolutely gone from digital world.
He's living
He's,
in El Salvador, retired.
for all I know, yes, I probably suspect he's in El Salvador or someplace very, very exciting, and doesn't have to report to his boss.
Yep. So I want to get into a little bit about the principles of Zen and how that aligns with Bitcoin. Because
Mhm.
on X, you talk a lot about this, and this is what attracted me to your profile. And you have some wonderful spiritual views. So, how does Bitcoin align with the principles of Zen?
So the way I see Bitcoin being really almost a byproduct of the Zen principles is how I relate the Bitcoin standard with the yin and the yang. So I was talking to Stacy about this, and I said, I feel there has to be some balance in the universe, and that's the idea of the yin and yang is there are two forces that are completely opposite in nature. It doesn't mean that one is good and the other one is bad. It's just that when when you have the existence of one kind of force, there's going to be another that is kind of equal and opposite in nature, and that balances or like holds together the structure of the universe and makes it function the way it does. And I think of fiat as being one of the forces of nature that really has the ability to corrupt and ruin lives and have perpetual wars. But until 2021, I really did not believe that there was a way to solve this problem. In on principle, maybe I can think of humanity suddenly taking center stage and people realizing that all these wars are useless and all this hatred is absolutely meaningless. We shouldn't be doing it. But that's not really the case. It never happens. But with Bitcoin in the picture, it really changed my views, and I started really believing, yes, this is the only way I can see a balance. The idea of Buddhism, it kind of branched from Hinduism during the time when Hinduism was getting too rigid. They were trying to follow everything by the book to the point that it became suffocating, and it was inevitable that we needed to find ways in which it wouldn't be as rigid and strict, because that's the whole story of Siddhartha Gautama, right? He was a prince, he had everything, and he enjoyed all sorts of luxuries, all the pleasures of life. He didn't have to worry about anything, but he was locked in a castle where he could he could never see the outside world. So he was living an illusion in an illusion already. His father made sure that he would not see the outside world, because the legend was that his birth chart said it would be inevitable that he would take the path of being a saint, and he would give up his kingdom. And the king was worried about his lineage and how he would pass on his responsibilities to his son. Siddhartha Gautama had to show the way of Buddhahood. So he is called Buddha, but Buddha only means someone who has attained enlightenment. That's what it means. So when we see his teachings, it almost directly tells you that you are a Buddha yourself. That means you only have to understand that you are it, and then everything will change. That was the point. And it doesn't mean that you have to like walk on fire and fast for 400 days and then bury yourself underground with no water or air to prove that you are an enlightened being, or even sit still. That's one of the things that people think, that when you think about meditation, it is expected to be still and to be empty of thoughts. But that's exactly opposite of meditation. Meditation does not ask you to sit rigidly and stop thinking. And it's really funny there. So when you tell yourself to stop thinking, you're actually thinking of not thinking. So it becomes really comedic at some point, that you wouldn't realize you're kind of wrapping yourself in an illusion that you aren't thinking something, but in fact you are. So that's the whole point. Like, to really attain a state of Zen, you are allowing your thoughts to be what they are. That's exactly how, when we think in terms of Bitcoin standard, Bitcoin is allowing us to be who we are, which is we are collaborative creatures. We like to be in tribes, and we like to see how we can trade goods and services for some kind of value system. So all the time, before currencies, we had the barter system for a reason. I needed something that you have, and you needed something I have, and I'm going to just accept it. But it kept evolving, because there was no let's say, global scale of acceptance. It was always tied to something more physical than spiritual, and values are from the spirit. It's not from physical world, because that's why when we hold a photograph, we don't hold it because it cannot be reproduced again. We hold it because it has emotional value. Right? People throw money at something as crazy as these trading cards, like millions of dollars, but it has emotional value more than physical value. So we always have to come back to what is it that our inner being is expecting us to do, and how do we connect to that inner higher self. which would then change our value system. We would change our thinking completely to the point that it arrives to the same principles as that of Bitcoin, where everybody has access to it, everybody can control it, and nobody can control it at the same time. And the value remains no matter who you are, what's your gender, what's your political affiliation. It really doesn't matter, because underlying the underlying foundation is similar to how everybody is Buddha, or you have the Buddha nature in you. Similarly, you have the Bitcoin standard in you. You just have to realize that you are it. You are part of the network. You are part of the consciousness that's connected through space and time. And it doesn't mean that uh, you don't lose your individuality in this physical world, but when you transcend this physical world, you end up being connected to everyone, and all at the same time. You're everybody. You're kind of representing everybody, and yet you are a bundle of energy that has some unique properties, just to play how we would in Hindu mythology. We call it Leela, which is play. So when the gods come to earth and they enact this whole thing, they're actually having Leelas in place to recreate the story of the Mahabharata or the story of Ramayana, and it's the same God reincarnating in different epochs, show you a different side of him, or different stories about human nature, but also saying that it's his Leela, it's not really him, simply because that's the game we play when we come to this physical world. It's almost like RPG.
So what you're saying is that, like life and consciousness, we are all connected, and Bitcoin, we are all connected because we all have access to this network. I've heard it said with the nodes that that's one way we're connected too. It keeps the network going.
Right.
What you're also saying is, just by having Bitcoin, we're also connected, and that makes it spiritual and
Yep.
closer to Zen. Your tagline on X is Memento Mori, which is Latin for remember that you will die.
Mhm.
And according to ChatGPT, it says this encourages people to live meaningfully, stay humble, and focus on what truly matters. And that sounds a lot like Bitcoin to me, too.
Yes. One of the things that I've understood when I've started asking these questions from first principles is that you end up going back and back and back and back, and you keep coming to the same conclusion from different routes. And I visualize it as a way of connecting the dots, the game of connecting the dots to come up with it. No matter where you start, the dots are numbered. And so you're going to end up with the same shape as the dots are. Similarly, a lot of these philosophies at some point kind of converge, and the convergence seems to tell me a similar story but with a different flavor. We are so involved in today's fiat world that we are always thinking about the future. We are thinking about when we will retire, what all we can do once we retire. We don't have to we don't have to create reports and talk to our bosses and try to get our next promotion, and we're always chasing the carrot at the end of the stick. That's been the game for the longest time I can think of. Bitcoin kind of releases everyone from this hamster wheel, where we are no longer chasing that carrot anymore. We are in fact having enough time to feel bored enough. At least that's how I see it. That you will start trying to create value, simply because humans are value generators by nature. We would like to show some form of work, but the incentive is, with fiat, you have to first plan to productize anything you can and sell it just for fiat. But in Bitcoin, it becomes a little more nuanced, where you're creating value rather than the product. And so you have the uh, reasoning ability to say, this is my life goal, this is my life force, which I'm going to kind of direct and focus towards what I can do to create value, not only for me but for people around me. And it gives you a sense of, okay, if I die tomorrow, I will be happy that I created value and I made a difference to somebody. Whereas in the fiat system, it's more or less like, I don't care if I have to sacrifice somebody else, as long as I'm fulfilling my goals of survival, I am okay, right? It doesn't matter if it's having value or not. If I have a good marketing team, I can just put a ribbon to feces and I can say it's a great product and people will take it, because it's all about how do you play with human psychology to make it falsely valued. Similar to how things happened with black pearls. Nobody wanted to have black pearls as their jewelry for the longest time, because white pearls were the thing. And some billionaire who bought an island thinking he's going to get a lot of these pearls, he went to this very famous jeweler, and what he did was he made a chain of black pearls and asked one of the most popular actress of that time to wear it and show it off. And all of a sudden, there was a market for black pearls. That's the origin story of how black pearls became more expensive, but it was defective. The only change was that it was worn by someone who was, a trendsetter. And next thing you know, you're having a huge market for black pearls. Until then, people didn't have the same sense of value for the same product.
Yeah, well, Jeeves, I could talk to you so much more. I've got a lot more questions, but next time we're going to chat about adoption in India, because you're going on a trip, so you can let me know how Bitcoin adoption is going there. And I
Yes.
will post links to your X below. Is there anywhere else people can find you?
No, I'm mostly kind of married to X right now, simply because of the community that's in that space. I find it hard to pivot to any other social media network where I can find like-minded Bitcoiners and get to share the kind of information I do and also get to hear from them as well. So you'll find me at X at Jeeves the Curious, and I'll be happy to connect with anybody.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.